covered the terrain dice. Briefly at the beginning we went through all the different type of dice. So now we're going to intro you to all the races of dragon dice. At least all the races that are currently out. And we're just going to talk about them real briefly, kind of talk about what their special racial ability is. And if they relate to a terrain in any way, we'll probably point that out.
Alright, so here's some examples of coral elves. Their special ability is that their maneuvers count as saves at a coastland terrain, which is that. That is their maneuver. Otherwise, it just counts as maneuvers everywhere else. They can cast blue and green magic as well. Here we have some lava elves. They cast red and black magic, and their special ability is at a highland terrain. Their maneuvers, which is that there, count as saves there. Everywhere else, it's just maneuvers. Here we have some dwarves. They cast gold and red magic. Their special ability is at a highland terrain. Their maneuvers are doubled. So that, instead of 2, it would be 4 at highland terrain.
So here we have goblins, and goblins have black and gold magic, and they double their maneuvers at swampland terrains.
This is the 5th race that come out for Dragon Dice. These are called the Amazons. And if you'll notice, Amazons don't have any colors. They're colorless dice, even though they're white, but just go with me here. And the cool thing about the Amazons is their color is dictated by whatever terrain they're currently at. So if they're at a flatland terrain like this, their colors would be blue and gold. And that's useful when casting magic, and we'll cover magic later. It's probably the most complicated part of this whole game. But the Amazons' racial abilities, they actually have 3 racial abilities. Their first one is while they're at flatland terrain, which is this one right here. Their maneuvers, let's see if I can find, yep, he's got maneuvers, their chariots there. Their maneuvers actually count as missile attacks. Another one of the racial abilities is when they fall to reserves, which we haven't talked about yet, and we will. Usually when you're in the reserves, the only thing you can do is cast helpful magic. Well, what the Amazons can do while they're in reserves, they can actually make a missile attack at their home terrain or the frontier terrain. We haven't talked about the frontier yet, but we will. The last ability of the Amazons is kind of a negative thing. And the way it works is, normally when you roll an ID icon for magic, you can double whatever colors of magic you match in the terrain. And we'll cover that in depth more later. But since the Amazons can't cast magic in reserves, they kind of have like an anti-magic ability. And what it means is, only if they're at a standing stone, which we've talked about already, that they can double their IDs in magic.
Alright, so here we have firewalkers. Now firewalkers, they can cast red and blue magic. One of their special abilities is if they're at a blue terrain, like this coastland here, instead of going to reserves, they can just go to a different terrain. So like if they're at the highland terrain here, they'd have to go to reserves to move. They just can't fly away. Their other ability is that if they're making a melee roll, their shields count as a melee result.
Okay, so the next race is the Undead. You know, every good game's got to have Undead in it. And the Undead have a couple special abilities. They're not actually tied to any terrain. They cast black magic. So if you recall, when we went through the terrains earlier, there was no terrains with black. So the way they can double magic is they can do it one of 2 ways. They can cast a spell called Deadlands, and what Deadlands does is essentially turns the terrain black as well as the other colors. And the other thing they can do is they can double their magic through the dead. What I mean by that is, let's say this vampire rolled an ID icon. And normally that would only be 3 magic since she's a 3-point character. But if the Amazons, let's say, have a 3-point character in their dead pile, the vampire can double her magic through the dead. So that's one of their special abilities, and that actually goes for all black magic. The Undead special ability is they can use everybody's dead pile, where most other people with black magic can only pick one guy's dead pile. Their next ability is called step damage. What that means is, let's say I have these 2 3-pointers alive, and I have these 2 guys in my dead pile. If these 2 are killed for any reason, I can exchange them from my dead pile to a lower health unit. So I just lost 6 points there, but I got 3 back in return. The Undead are very hard to kill when it comes to that. And their last special ability is if somebody's trying to bury him. Remember we talked about burying is basically they're out of the game for good. There's only a couple ways to get them back. They have something called resist burial, which means if they roll a save icon, which would be this here, they resist the burial and you didn't bury them and you wasted your magic or you wasted whatever ability you just used to try and bury them. Okay, next we've got the swamp stalkers, which snake men is what a lot of us like to call them. They got two special abilities. Their first special ability is while out of swampland terrain. Their maneuvers are these kind of like tadpole looking things. Count as saves, so real similar to the coral elves and the lava elves. And their second one's a bit trickier. It's called a mutation, and the way it works is if you've got a swamp stalker dead, let's say this guy is in our dead unit area, and let's say these Amazon units are in reserves, and you have a swamp stalker at terrain. So you have to have some swamp stalkers out of terrain, you got to have some swamp stalkers dead, and your opponent's got to have somebody in reserves. So what you can do is you can target a unit in the reserves. So let's say I target this mage. This mage has to roll a save or he mutates into a swamp stalker. So the mage would either have to roll a save icon or the face icon. Otherwise I could bring back my swamp stalker and the mage would then go to the dead unit area.
Alright, here we have some frost wings. They cast blue and black magic. They have kind of two special abilities. Their first one here is magic negation, meaning if an opposing army at the same terrain is rolling for magic, you would take away 1 for every magic symbol you roll. IDs do not count for that. The other thing is like the Amazons, they can only double magic at a standing stone. Here we have some Scalders. They have two abilities. The first one is that for every Scalder unit in your army is 1 autosave against missiles. Their other ability is any save icon that's not in the ID, like for this would be this one and this one, does damage back to the army that's attacking you through melee. It is non-savable unless they have spells for the save, and we'll talk about those.
So here we have Treefolk, and Treefolk have green and gold magic. One of the special abilities of Treefolk is their ability to get double counter maneuvers, and that's all the time regardless of terrain. After maneuvering, the Treefolk also have the ability to what's called replant, or just replanting, and what that allows you to do is trade point for point for a unit in your dead. And so in this case we have a 1 point unit at some terrain, and then we've got another 1 point in the dead. And so if one has more magic or more melee and that's what you're going for, you can swap them in and out for that ability.